Let's look at some example aldehydes and ketones. Which of these is an aldehyde? Well, they each have the carbonyl carbon. That's the C double bond O. But this one has it on an end. This is the aldehyde because it's on the end carbon. Notice that when it's on the end carbon, that carbon also has a hydrogen like this. Sometimes that's how the aldehyde group is described, as C double bond O with a CH. We notice on this one, the ketone, that carbon does not have a hydrogen attached to it. Okay. On a ketone, the carbonyl group is not on an end. It doesn't have to be right smack in the middle, but it needs to be not on an end. Are these carbohydrates? They're an aldehyde and a ketone. They are not. Why? They are missing the OH groups. The hydroxyl groups, remember that's the OH that must be there for it to be a carbohydrate. On a carbohydrate, every carbon that is not the carbonyl carbon would have an OH, a normal carbohydrate. If one of those is missing, it would be called a deoxy sugar, like a deoxyribose. That's what it means, is a hydroxy is missing. Let's look at some sugars. This first sugar is glucose. Glucose is a monosaccharide. There's two different ways to draw it because glucose does not stay in what we call the linear form. This is the linear form, and this is the cyclic form. If it's dissolved in water, it actually switches back and forth between the two forms, actually spending most of its time in this ring structure, in this ring form. So this is the biologically active form of glucose. A lot of times in biology books and stuff, they just draw this version of it. By the way, when this version is made, when it goes back and forth, there's two possible orientations right here. Sometimes the OH is pointed up and sometimes it's down. I don't really get into that in this class, but just in case you see it in another class, that's the alpha and beta forms. And that switches back and forth as long as it can, if it's in water and it can react. So that gives you different versions of glucose. But the orientations of all of these other OHs is stuck. For glucose, this one is always down, and this one is always up, and this one is always down, and so forth. Let's see, what else do I need to tell you? Well, one way we can spot that these are both monosaccharides is that the linear form has one carbonyl carbon, and the cyclic form has a ring with oxygen in the ring, and both of them have many OH groups. So that's what you look for to spot a monosaccharide. You want to look for the oxygen, carbonyl, or in the ring, and then lots of OH groups to know. Let's see, let's fill this out. Glucose, is glucose an aldehyde or a ketone? Since that carbonyl is on the end, it's an aldehyde. So we would say glucose is an aldose. And the last thing I want to show you about this is that the cyclic form has a hemiacetal group. The hemiacetal group is that COCOH series. To find it, find the oxygen in the ring, then look for the carbon on either side. So there's a carbon here and a carbon here. So this is COC, and then the OH part always points off on the right. COCOH, that's the series I'm looking for. So glucose does have a hemiacetal, so I'll write hemi here. That hemiacetal is reactive, and we'll be looking for it on a lot of sugars. Let's look at, so there's the instructions. Let's look at fructose. Does fructose have a hemiacetal? Find the oxygen in the ring, a carbon on either side. So there's the COC part, that's the easy part. And then we see a bond right off of that carbon, and there's an OH. Fructose has a hemiacetal. Let's look at galactose. Look for the oxygen in the ring, carbon on either side, and then an OH pointing off on the right. Standard way to write this is with the OH pointing off on the right. We call this end of the molecule the reducing end. So this has the hemiacetal again. You may have noticed that galactose and glucose look very similar. Fructose doesn't look so similar. These are all isomers. Why are they isomers? They all have the same atoms, if we checked. But they have different structures. Now, glucose and galactose look awfully similar. So let's kind of compare those and see what's different. Remember I told you that on the glucose, this OH can be up or down. This is when it's down, it's the alpha form, and when it's up, it's the beta form. So that can switch, because if it's in water, it keeps going back and forth between the linear form, and that can be either way. But the others are locked in place, and so we can see what the difference is. This OH is the same, this OH is the same, but this one is different. It's up on galactose and down on glucose, and that can't just switch like these two can. So anyway, so there's a difference in their structure. They're connected in a different way. If we look at them in three-dimensional space, they're connected in a different way. So those are different sugars, and your body recognizes those differently.